So today, we're jumping into one of the most transformative and, frankly, one of the most contradictory periods in all of history, the 64-year reign of Queen Victoria. This was an era that didn't just reshape Britain, it completely redrew the map of the entire world.
And that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did a single teenager inheriting a kingdom that was an absolute mess end up defining an entire century? A century of incredible breakthroughs and just brutal contradictions. To figure that out, we have to look at what was happening before she ever wore the crown.
To really get a grip on Victoria's impact, you have to understand the world she was walking into. It wasn't a powerful, stable kingdom. It was chaotic, it was crumbling, and it was teetering right on the edge. You see, for decades before Victoria, the monarchy had been in a total freefall. King George III's reign ended with war, massive debt, and his own tragic mental illness. His sons, who became King George IV and William IV, were seen as these wasteful, extravagant characters, and, this is the crucial part, they failed to produce a legitimate heir. This kicked off a huge succession crisis, and nobody knew who was going to rule next. And look, this wasn't just a problem for the royals. Parliament was getting more and more powerful, and the public was starting to see the monarchy as completely out of touch. At the very same time, the Industrial Revolution is just exploding, and it's creating all these new, frankly horrifying problems, like child labor and disgusting urban slums. The old way of doing things just felt totally broken, and people were absolutely desperate for something new.
And that something new arrived in the form of the most unlikely person you can imagine, a young princess who had been raised in near total isolation from the rest of the world. Her name was Victoria, and she was about to become queen.
On June 20th, 1837, the old king dies. And just like that, this 18-year-old is the queen. Now, for a nation that was just sick of old, scandalous kings, her youth wasn't a problem at all. It was a symbol of a fresh start, a clean break from all the drama of the past. It was hope. But here's the thing. She wasn't just thrown to the wolves. Her reign was built on a really stable foundation. Think of it like a three-legged stool. First, she had this incredibly strict upbringing called the Kensington system, which gave her amazing discipline. Second, her first prime minister, Lord Melbourne, was this brilliant political guide. And third, her husband, Prince Albert, helped her completely modernize the monarchy. Those three things together created a rock-solid base. Okay, so with that foundation secure, her era comes to be defined by these two gigantic, interconnected forces: the engine of industry chugging away at home and the relentless, unstoppable expansion of empire all across the globe. And these two things, industry and empire, you can't separate them. They worked together in this perfect, powerful cycle. The colonies in the empire would send raw materials, like cotton, to Britain. That cotton would fuel the factories of the Industrial Revolution. Then those factories would pump out finished goods, which were sold right back to the people in the colonies. One literally could not exist without the other. And the sheer scale of this expansion, it is just mind-boggling. By the end of Victoria's reign, the British Empire controlled 1/4 of the world's land and 1/4 of its people. Just think about that for a second. An incredible amount of global power. And that is where that famous phrase comes from: the sun never sets on the British Empire. It wasn't just a cool saying, it was literally true. At any given moment, somewhere in the world, the sun was shining on a part of the British Empire. But all of this massive, world-changing progress, it created a society that was just full of contradictions. Seriously, for every amazing story of Victorian progress you hear, there's a dark and often painful flip side. So on the surface, you have this picture-perfect image of Victorian life, right? A super strict moral code, this huge belief in science and progress, and these core values of hard work and respectability. This was the era where the middle class really exploded, and they believed in self-improvement and keeping up appearances. But when you peel back that respectable layer, wow, the reality was grim. That industrial engine we talked about, it was fueled by horrific child labor. Unbelievable wealth existed right next to the most desperate poverty. And the whole project of empire was justified by this deeply racist idea called the white man's burden, the belief that they had a duty to civilize people they considered inferior. And this, right here, is the absolute core of what we call the Victorian paradox. It's this wild state where incredible innovation and wealth existed at the exact same time as, and were often directly built on, the most brutal exploitation and prejudice. And, this whole paradox, it's not just some dusty old history.
Its effects are deeply baked into our world today, shaping countries, economies, and even cultures in ways you might not expect.
Let's just take a country like Pakistan, for example. The English language, which is used in their government and courts, that's a direct holdover from when the British imposed it for colonial administration. The national obsession with cricket? Yep, brought over by the British. And the painful legacy of colorism and certain beauty standards? That can be traced right back to the racial hierarchy the Victorians imposed.
So in 1901, after nearly 64 years on the throne, Queen Victoria dies, closing the book on this incredible chapter. I mean, she inherited a weak, crumbling monarchy and left behind the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. But man, the foundations of that empire were complicated.
Which leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? The Victorian age gave us railways, vaccines, and new ideas about democracy. But it also brought conquest, brutal exploitation, and staggering inequality. So how should we judge it? As an era of progress or an era of exploitation? The paradox is, the only real answer is both.